Hello everyone, are you back?
Yes, I'm back.
Okay. Thank you for reply to me. So can I begin? Then I begin now. I know tomorrow is a holiday, so we can probably we can finish it a little bit earlier than usual.
Okay, well, welcome back. And we're going to be talking now for a few minutes about a concept called critical thinking. Now, critical thinking usually has a meaning or a connotation to it. And what we're going to be talking about tonight is a very operationalized, very specific way of thinking about critical thinking. And then we'll tie critical thinking to empathy and social interest, and we'll see how that works. So let me share with you. Whoops. Okay, so as I mentioned, critical thinking usually brings an idea or concept to our mind. And I'll use this as an example. My daughter, who is a high school teacher, she's always using the term critical thinking. And oftentimes, I think what she's meaning about critical thinking is that thinking that didn't necessarily agree with her thinking. So therefore, the person needs to be more critical with their thinking. It's not a very good way of thinking about critical thinking at all. Now, the reason that I'm somewhat interested in this topic is because I was on a committee that met twice a month for the 2 years I was at that university. And there's three of us, and all of us were professors, two of them clinical psychologists, and then myself as a counselor educator. And we would talk about critical thinking for an hour and a half or 2 hours twice a month. And even though these people were very intelligent, a lot of experience, they too had difficulty in operationalizing or making critical thinking part of our curriculum. This was a doctorate in psychology program. Students were very intelligent, very motivated. And so we wanted to infuse critical thinking in all of our classes. But to do that, we had to be able to come up with a concept or a way of thinking about critical thinking that was relevant to the faculty and to the students. So part of my interest in this is because of the work that I did at that university for those 2 years on this particular topic. But beyond that, I think this is the really important aspect of critical thinking. When a person knows how to critically think, I think they're less likely to make decisions that are based on erroneous information, can be hurtful to themselves or to others if they're not critically thinking. So let's take a look at a definition that we're going to be using for this course. What is critical thinking? There's several sentences to this concept. The first sentence is this: critical thinking requires an individual to be open-minded and to use reasoning and logic to form a tentative conclusion about an idea or concept. So this first sentence probably fits with most people's thinking about what critical thinking is: using reasoning and logic to form a tentative conclusion about an idea or concept. So tentative is kind of the important word here, because you're using reasoning and logic not to conclude, but to make a tentative conclusion about an idea or concept. Okay? So that's the first sentence. This is the second sentence. Critical thinking encourages you to use your experience in forming your reasoning and logic, but to come to conclusions by using more than your experience. So there are kind of two ways of knowing. There are many ways of knowing, but there's two general ways of knowing. One is through our experience. So I'm 70 years old, and so I have a lot of experience. So a lot of my reasoning or a lot of my decision making will come from my experience. However, if I only use my experience, I'm really limited to what that experience is. So reasoning and logic brings in a lot more ways of thinking about and deciding. So two things: our experience counts. Our experience is important, but it's limiting. If we add reasoning and logic, then I think we'll be a little bit better off. But there's another key sentence, and this is the next one. So I think you're starting to see what critical thinking is. It starts with our own ideas based on our own experience, maybe our own education and teaching. But then we add to that reasoning and logic. And reasoning and logic can be a lot of different things, but it also can be statistics, it can be research methodology, it can be looking at peer-reviewed literature and making our own decisions or conclusions based on what we're reading by using reasoning and logic. It can be logic argument, and or is this a true argument? And so these are sorts of things that are part of the critical thinking mechanism. So critical thinking requires to understand that personal or societal bias must be overcome in forming. So now we have another element to add to this idea of what is critical thinking, and that is bias. Our own personal bias, maybe a bias that we grew up with, or a bias that we believe based on our community, or bias that we believed based on societal concepts or ideas. So you can see that there's a lot of interference with ability to critically think. And now the last two concepts related to critical thinking. Critical thinking requires us to be open-minded as we consider alternative concepts and ideas as we form opinions. Critical thinking requires us to be open-minded as we consider alternate concepts and ideas as we form opinions. So it takes an open mind if we believe, and I'll use this as an example. I'm sure in Taiwan this may exist too, but there are some TV shows that are based on solving crimes. And they're usually fictional, but they can also be true crime shows. But the point being is that there's always a twist as to actually what was the motive of the crime that was being done, who did it, could there be another explanation, could there be a way of getting beyond what the initial conclusion was. We see this a lot in science. I was the privilege of being a mechanical engineering major in my undergraduate program. And so a lot of what we had to do was to challenge our beliefs with information, mathematical equations, scientific experimentation, these ways to challenge what we believed. And invariably, almost in every single class that I took, there was this huge issue that we thought we knew the answer to, but when we were able to look at alternate explanations for what was happening, we found that our first impression or our first idea was incomplete, and that we needed more information or more data to be able to make a better conclusion. So critical thinking requires us to be open-minded so we can consider alternate concepts or ideas as we form opinions. There's a journalist that I follow, and during COVID, she did her show from her home as opposed to studio, and there was a sign behind her that basically the paraphrase of that sign or that poster was, "What's the other explanation?" And is trying to report the news. What might be an alternative hypothesis or alternative explanation for what we're seeing? So I think that's to me, if we can't be open-minded as we consider alternate concepts, then there's no way that we can call that critical thinking. And then finally, in any controversial issue or problem, critical thinking allows us to get beyond emotion to consider all alternatives in determining a conclusion, but also knowing that the conclusion is tentative and may be altered with more information and or thought. So let's put this all together. So what is critical thinking? Critical thinking requires an individual to be open-minded and to use reasoning and logic to form a tentative conclusion about an idea or concept. Critical thinking encourages you to use your experience in forming your reasoning and logic, but to come to the conclusions by using more than your experience. Critical thinking requires us to understand that personal or societal bias must be overcome. And I would add maybe a different word here, must be understood and overcome. So where it says overcome, I would probably add the two words. Let's see, critical thinking requires us to understand that personal or societal bias must be understood and overcome. Oftentimes we don't even know what that personal or societal bias is. So first have to understand it, then overcome it. Informing conclusions. Critical thinking requires us to be open-minded as we consider alternate concepts and ideas as we form opinions. In any controversial issue or problem, critical thinking allows us to get beyond emotion and bias, to consider all alternatives in determining a conclusion, but also knowing that the conclusion is tentative and may be altered with more information and or thought. I know that's a lot. I will write this out in one paragraph in a Word document, and I will make sure that you get that as well, so that way you don't have to go from slide to put it together. So I'll make a separate slide and or a Word document and make sure that you get that so you can kind of see it all together, what the operational definition that we'll be using for this semester as to what critical thinking is. Okay, so the discussion question that I'd like to talk about when we're live includes these. What are common impediments to critical thinking? So why does critical thinking not happen as often as it needs to? Why does journalism, advertising, advertising is the opposite of critical thinking, by the way. Critical thinking, advertisement is all about selling a product. It's not about being critical in what they're saying about that product. It's about publication, or it's about propaganda. It's about trying to sell an idea. Propaganda in general is not critical thinking. All this information you hear on the internet that you can't really determine the origin of it or the validity of it. So we should throw it away, not even pay attention to it, not even listen to it, not even look at it. And yet we do. That's not critical thinking. So what are some common impediments to critical thinking? Well, we're going to discuss that. I want to hear what you think about that. What are ways that we can encourage critical thinking in students or others we interact with? So in a leadership position, either as a teacher or a helper or whatever your role is in working or interacting with others, how can you encourage critical thinking? Why is critical thinking uncommon when it should be the common? Why is it uncommon? And then what is the relationship of critical thinking to social interest? So when I come in live, we're going to take a look at all these discussion questions and see how that goes. So at this point, I'm going to stop the recording. And so the next time that we speak, it should be live in just a few hours from the time that I'm recording this. Okay, well, thank you very much for your attention, and we'll see you soon.
Okay, we are going to finish the watching video. Let's stop the video at this point. Do you need a few minutes to discuss with each other? I'm thinking how to okay, would you like to discuss with each other for some of these questions? Jiarong can work together with Xinyu, and Anish, Alona, and Fengyi can work together. Would you like to do this through the line message? And we can spend maybe 3 minutes to discuss for this question. And I am asking the Professor Mark to join us soon. So as far as I know, you can touch the line and contact each other.